experience. I will be presenting extracts from my novella in progress, Half-Life, an erotic science fiction about a woman who falls in love with nuclear waste. Chapter 5, The Shell. A tumbleweed the size of a car had interrupted Pearl's journey to work. It had freed itself from the ground or a crack in the building and gathered strength in the high winds, picking up rocks and debris in its potentially radioactive tendrils. By the time it collided with Pearl's hatchback, it was a formidable force. As summer transitioned to autumn in Hanford, the winds would start their swirling. Pearl had heard about the winds. They were famous for their challenging nature, their ability to drive people away. For the mass of workers who first lived at Hanford, it was the intensity of winds whistling through their vulnerable prefabricated houses that broke the collective camel's back, causing them to leave town in droves. Hanford was a chosen place, an unwilling sacrifice, the only site in the US that could match the requirements to arm the country with world-ending force, said the man tasked with finding it. That it was occupied by thousands of families and a tribe with ancient claim was deemed a solvable inconvenience. When the army swept in like a bulldozer to clear the land, they were given just 30 days to pack up their entire lives and go. As a chill touched her bones, Pearl could not help but feel these hostile, harsh winds as the souls dispossessed by war. The tumbleweeds that haunted their land, a tangled knot of spines, bent out of shape by force. Sometimes the wind would swirl into dust storms, spinning columns of ashes. Pearl fought her way to the lab head first. She a waif, the wind so strong. It pushed her back as if to rewind her. The summer that was yesterday was hard to imagine even now, its pink skies and bleak pastels washed out and bloodless. The winds that had arrived to the landscape like the spots of blood that bloomed on Lady Macbeth's hand. Out, damned. But the harsh slap of cold had released her from the curious depth of her dreams, which came heavy and dank each night, covering her in pools of sweat. Abstract forms giving way to clear visions, opening her eyes and cleaning them with tears. But the harsh slap of cold had released her from the curious depths of her dreams, which came heavy and dank each night, covering her in pools of sweat. Abstract forms giving way to clear visions, opening her eyes and cleaning them with tears. But the harsh slap of cold had, cleaning them with tears. She shut the metal port of the laboratory behind her, exhausted and incredulous that all she had done today was wake up. With a long, exhaling breath, the significance of this particular day began to dawn on her. The team entered into their whites as if preparing for a ceremony. Their suits were numbered, together a hive mind, a quantum computer all tasked with the same operation. Tank SY-101 was being transferred into a new shell, a highly technical and difficult procedure. Its single shell of mild steel was corroding, growing frail like aging skin. The team were working hard to remove the waste to a new double shell tank made of stronger stainless steel. Taping the hazmats with duct tape to their boots and gloves, the sterile nature of their dress did nothing to disguise the reek of nerves that enlivened the air. A febrile concoction of vertigo, stage fright, birthdays, lucid prayer and panic. They drew upon the experiments they had conducted like mantras. Logic would absolve them, data would absolve them. Equations and numbers forming a force field of lucid faith. SY-101 was one of the 177 gargantuan tanks of radioactive waste that lay buried underground at Hanford. Each tank was an entirely unique and devastating combination of elements, leftovers from the Manhattan Project and the Cold War, where nuclear weapons were being produced with maniacal speed. The Hanford site was home to the B reactor, the largest cog in the machine of plutonium production. Numerous violent chemical processes were used to separate this precious element from the uranium that bore it. The tanks of waste were the dregs of that operation, an unwanted product from a time when winning meant more than life itself, the motherless offspring of Little Boy and Fat Man. Left to rot untouched, the tanks had evolved a life of their own, becoming more deadly and complex, like how Frankenstein's monster, shut out in the cold, grew a bloody conscience. Each was now a unique combination of elements, exhaustive inventories that had once been kept for each tank, salts, acids, and oxides used to strip out the plutonium, now served only as vague clues. Besides these chemicals were much more random and accidental elements. Fallen hard hats, dropped lunchboxes, dead bugs and birds, tons of diatomous earth, created from the fossilized remains of tiny aquatic silica-bodied organisms. A collection of poison balls intended for the unlucky mouths of those lives caught short and fateless in the midst of a nuclear shutdown. Contaminated and failed hardware. Pearl imagined that perhaps it was a single element of this detritus that had made its way into the shell and catalyzed the indescribable something that was now SY-101's insides. Something as insignificant as the fibers of a lost glove, the sole of a worn boot. No, a single eyelash that had fallen through the portal and created a monster. How a fly sullies an entire soup. She thought further of a pearl's beginnings, how a foreign substance slips into the crack of an oyster between the mantle and the shell and creates an irritation, causing the oyster to protect itself by producing nacre, an organic crystalline matter, to sheathe the foreign matter in iridescence. Over time, these smooth layers form a pearl, an irritation, a shining little aberration. Erasmus Darwin once wrote, "E conscious omnia," everything from shells. Pearl felt, everything from dirt, was perhaps more accurate. Tank SY-101 was now threatening to explode, splattering its highly radioactive content over the desert, poisoning everything in its reach. The thick, viscous nature of its toxic colloidal contents were backing up and clogging the lines, putting enormous pressure on their points of connection. Panic simmered among the scientists in the observation zone, who had predicted and prayed that this would not happen. Pearl watched on, choked with butterflies, as the engineers in plastic hoods and oxygen tanks crowded around SY-101, which was being penetrated by metal tubes and elaborate pump systems as if it were on life support. The scene was evocative of death and discovery, surgeons round a body, astronauts discovering a new planet, archaeologists unearthing an ancient sarcophagus. SY-101 was a sphinx, its chemical makeup endlessly bearing new riddles. The millions of dollars of engineering, the infinite brain power and perspiration invested in decoding it was falling short. A system that by all calculations should have succeeded seamlessly was now being hastily sewn up and aborted. SY-101 showed their fallibility, their hubris, teaching them time and time again to fail better. For this reason, it demanded the most attention from the scientists, their Pavlovian fascination, a moth-like dedication. Its crust was a crunchy, hard salt cake, creaking and peaking with the frequency of icebergs, undulating and bubbling like clouds. Beneath, a thick and Stygian syrup, studded in streaks with crystals and calcifications, acidic, caustic, boring a hole in its shell to escape, forever becoming something else. Pearl liked to gain a holistic overview of her subjects, to zoom into the atoms and out to the stars. Bearing witness to the tank's defiant matter, its irreverence and mysterious nature, a strange affinity began to form with the sleepy passion of awakening. A shimmer of nascent emotion, a momentary and vivid unearthing of her buried adolescence. Memories that had long since been dormant arose with the pungency of raw bile and desert flowers. Chapter 4, God's Blood. The sun is hot, the air is humid. A thin membrane of sweat covers her body, dripping from each pore and trickling southward. Pearl sheds a layer and feels freer. She licks her top lip and savors the sweet sour taste. While body odor clung to the other kids like armor, Pearl would have to sniff her clothes hard for its trace. She liked its potency, its offensiveness, and now the desert was bringing it all out of her, a sign of things to come. Soon her water bottle is empty. Only remnants of backwash cling to the side. She needs water, imagines herself surrounded by it, feels the romance of the desert, how it all used to be underwater, how that explains the sand. A mirage is the desert, dreaming of its past. Her head begins to pound as if an alarm was sounding. Her clothes suffocate her. With dehydration, her thoughts become more hostile. The haunted Doomtown house from before loomed like an unmarked grave and grew giant spikes which pierced through its walls and pinned it to the earth. Words from the tour guide came back to Pearl. They waited for 0 hour. The images of the blast rolling forward to take the house repeated itself. Pearl felt that she had been walking for hours, that she herself was a soldier waiting in the dugouts. A bubbling crest of flame, followed by a growing corona. Pearl looked up, imagining the mushroom billing over her and crushing the sky. Pearl thought for a second she might die and didn't imagine her life would be so short, so made a quick prayer to God or whoever else lived up there to let her live. Clouds thickened above. The burgeoning mushroom head transformed into sweet, puffy cherubs who shielded her from the sun, their edges expanding to form a blanket, inviting her to lie on the ground, to be still and let them hold her. She lies, panting in their shade, her burning body enveloped in a blissful coolness. The air around her becomes heavy, so heavy that it holds her down. The sky roars and cracks. A slice of lightning opens the clouds. Rain, thick and fat, pounds on her body, drenching her clothes and skin. But it is the smell that wets the inside of her mouth, the erotic play of rain and earth. There is a name for this smell, petrichor, defined as the earthy scent produced when rain hits dry soil. The word is constructed from ancient Greek, petra meaning stone or rock, and ichor describes the ethereal golden fluid that is the blood of the gods. Is this the smell then? Is this the smell of earth being infused with God? The smell of prayers being answered? The earth sighs with pleasure beneath her, allowing the rain to enter its cracks and heal its wounds, relenting to a thick, even clay. She turns over onto her body. Grateful, relieved, she kisses the ground. The kiss gives way to open mouths and tongues. She begins to claw the ground, drawing thick handfuls of clay into her mouth to eat, dragging her body along like a snake through the force of her appetite. The cloying texture threatens to stick in her throat, but is pushed into submission. It was heavenly smooth, gray-brown and shiny like the surface of a dolphin, ripe meat infused with raw God's blood. To Pearl, the taste and feeling it gave her was incomparable. She flopped over and over in the rain, coating herself in mud. She was found by her father, soaking, filthy, naked, with a mouthful of dirt. Pearl wanted the earth to swallow her up, and the feeling would never leave her. That night she dreamt of being face to face with a baby woolly mammoth, its long hair moving and swaying gently as if it were submerged underwater. The baby looked at her with huge pleading eyes, glistening with innocence. She wanted to look after it, and found in her hand a shiny red apple, extending her arm to meet its mouth. The baby mammoth took the entire apple, crunching. It seemed to thank her, to smile. Pearl woke the next morning to find a reddish-brown color staining her knickers and sticking to the inside of her legs. She tasted it, but it wasn't mud.